The blood on Yates Porter's knuckles was still fresh when he saw her standing outside the general store, barely reaching the hitching post where his horse was tied. He had not meant to hit the man so hard, but when someone cheated at cards in a town like La Junta, Colorado, in the summer of 1878, there were consequences that could not be avoided. Yates flexed his massive hands, watching the skin stretch tight over knuckles the size of walnuts, and felt that familiar sickness rise in his throat. His hands were weapons, had always been weapons, and he hated them more with each passing year. The woman was perhaps 4 feet 11 inches tall, with copper-red hair escaping from beneath a simple bonnet, and she was struggling to lift a sack of flour onto the back of a small wagon. Yates watched her for a moment, these enormous hands of his hanging uselessly at his sides, before his conscience got the better of him and he approached. "Madam, let me help you with that." She turned, and Yates found himself looking down into the brightest green eyes he had ever seen. She could not have been more than 20 years old, and there was something fierce in her expression that made him take an involuntary step backward, despite being 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighing close to 260 pounds. "I can manage," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, the flour sack slipped from her grip and would have hit the ground if Yates had not caught it with one hand. "I am sure you can, madam, but there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered freely." He placed the flour sack gently in her wagon, being careful not to tear the fabric with his rough fingers. "Yates Porter, madam. I work at the Triple Crown Ranch about 5 miles east of here." "Rebecca Reid," she said, and there was a wariness in her voice that Yates recognized. She was looking at his hands, at the blood still visible on his knuckles, and he could see her making calculations about what kind of man he might be. "I appreciate the assistance, Mr. Porter. It is no trouble at all." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that he was not the kind of man who went looking for fights, that he hated violence despite his size making it seem inevitable. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Mr. Porter," she called after him, and he turned back. "Your hand is bleeding." "It is nothing, madam. It does not look like nothing." She reached into her wagon and pulled out a clean cloth. "At least wrap it before you ride home." Yates looked down at his hands again, at these massive, destructive things that had brought him nothing but trouble his whole life, and shook his head. "I would not want to ruin your cloth, Miss Reid." "It is Mrs. Reid," she corrected, and Yates felt something sink in his chest that he had no right to feel. "My husband passed 3 months ago. Pneumonia took him quick." She held out the cloth more insistently. "And I insist." There was something in her tone that brooked no argument, so Yates held out his right hand. Rebecca stepped closer, and he was struck again by how small she was, how delicate her fingers looked as she wrapped the cloth around his knuckles. He held himself perfectly still, terrified that one wrong move would hurt her, that he would crush those tiny fingers without meaning to. "You are very gentle for a man who apparently just came from a fight," Rebecca said, tying off the cloth with practiced efficiency. "I try to be, madam. My whole life I have tried to be." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and Yates felt something shift in the air between them. "I believe you," she said finally. "Thank you again for your help with the flour. Any time, Mrs. Reid, any time at all." Yates rode back to the Triple Crown with his mind full of copper hair and green eyes, telling himself he was a fool for thinking about a recently widowed woman, especially one so small and delicate that he could probably span her waist with his hands. He was a danger to everyone around him, had been since he was 16 years old and accidentally broke his younger brother's arm while wrestling. The memory of Samuel's scream still woke him up some nights, even though it had been 12 years and his brother had long since forgiven him. The Triple Crown was a modest cattle ranch run by an aging widower named Tom Carlyle, who had taken Yates on 5 years ago when no one else would hire him. Tom did not care about Yates's size or his fearsome reputation. He cared that Yates showed up on time, worked hard, and treated the animals with kindness. It was the closest thing to home that Yates had known since leaving Missouri. "You look like you have been thinking too hard," Tom said when Yates returned the horse to the barn. The old man was sitting on a barrel, whittling a piece of wood into what might eventually become a spoon. Dangerous habit for a young man. "I met someone in town today," Yates said, unsaddling his horse with careful, practiced movements. "A widow. She was very small." Tom laughed, a sound like dried leaves rustling. "And you are very large. I can see the problem already forming in that thick head of yours." He set down his whittling knife and looked at Yates seriously. "Let me tell you something, son. My Martha was 5 feet tall on her best day, and I was 6'3". We had 42 years together before the fever took her, and not once did I hurt her because I was bigger. You know why? Why? Because I loved her, and love makes a man careful. Love makes a man think before he moves, speak before he shouts, and hold gentle when everything in him wants to hold tight." Tom picked up his knife again. "You spent so much time being afraid of your own strength that you forgot strength can be a gift if you know how to use it right. I broke Samuel's arm. You were 16 and fooling around like boys do. Samuel does not hold it against you, so why do you keep holding it against yourself?" Tom gestured with the half-formed spoon. "Go to the creek and wash that blood off your hands. And maybe think about what you are really afraid of, because I do not think it is actually hurting someone." Yates did as Tom suggested, walking the quarter-mile to the creek that ran along the northern edge of the property. The water was cold and clear, fed by mountain runoff, and he scrubbed his hands until every trace of blood was gone. But even with clean hands, he could still see the violence they were capable of, the damage they could inflict. What was he really afraid of? Tom's question echoed in his mind as he sat by the creek, watching the water flow past. He was afraid of being a monster, of becoming the thing people expected him to be when they saw his size. He was afraid of being alone, of never knowing the kind of love Tom had shared with his Martha, because he was too terrified to reach out and take it. And now, after one brief meeting, he was afraid that Rebecca Reid had somehow seen past his size to the man underneath, and that if he let himself hope, the disappointment would break something in him that could never be repaired. He went to town 3 days later with a list of supplies Tom needed and a heart full of foolish hope. Rebecca was not at the general store, and Yates felt both relieved and disappointed. He was loading fence posts into the ranch wagon when he heard a commotion coming from the direction of the boarding house. "I am telling you, I paid for this month and the next," a woman's voice said, tight with anger and distress. "I have the receipt right here." "I do not care what that piece of paper says," a man's voice responded, loud and belligerent. "Your husband owed me money from before he died, and I am taking it out of the rent. You want to stay, you pay me what he owed, or you get out." Yates rounded the corner to find Rebecca standing on the boarding house steps, facing down a heavy-set man with a red face and whiskey on his breath. She was holding a piece of paper in her small hands, and even from a distance, Yates could see they were shaking. "Mr. Simmons, my husband never borrowed money from you. He did not believe in debt." "Are you calling me a liar?" Simmons took a step toward her, and Rebecca retreated up 1 step. "I am saying there must be some mistake," Rebecca said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Yates crossed the distance between them in long strides. "Is there a problem here?" Simmons turned, and his face went from red to pale when he saw Yates. "This is not your business, Porter. I am making it my business. What is this about the lady's husband owing you money? He borrowed $50 6 months ago and never paid it back. Now he is dead and she needs to make it right. Do you have proof of this loan?" Yates asked, keeping his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. "My word is proof enough." "No, it is not." Yates looked at Rebecca. "Mrs. Reid, did your husband ever mention borrowing money from Mr. Simmons?" "Never. Michael was careful with money. He saved every penny he could, and he would have told me about a debt that size." Her voice was stronger now, bolstered by Yates's presence. "Seems to me like there is no debt, Simmons. And if the lady has paid her rent fair and square, she has every right to stay." "You cannot prove that her husband did not borrow from me," Simmons blustered, but he was backing away from the steps now, from the sheer size of Yates blocking the sunlight. "And you cannot prove that he did." "But I can prove that you have been drinking at 10 in the morning, and I wonder what the sheriff would think about you trying to extort money from a widow." Yates did not raise his voice, did not have to. His size did the work for him, and he hated it and was grateful for it in equal measure. Simmons muttered something obscene under his breath and stalked away. Yates watched him go before turning to Rebecca. "Are you all right, Mrs. Reid?" "Yes, thank you." Again. She came down the steps, and Yates noticed she was wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. "You seem to make a habit of arriving just when I need help. I am glad I was here. Simmons is a bully and a drunk, but he is mostly harmless. Still, you should not have to deal with men like that alone." "I am stronger than I look, Mr. Porter." "I do not doubt that for a second, madam. But strength comes in different forms, and there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered." Rebecca smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face from pretty to beautiful. "You said something similar when you helped me with the flower. Is that your philosophy of life?" "I suppose it is. I have strength that I never asked for and often do not want, so I figure I might as well use it to help people when I can." "That is remarkably selfless." She tilted her head, studying him with those sharp green eyes. "Most men your size would use their strength to take what they want, not to protect those who cannot protect themselves." "I am not most men." "No, I do not think you are." She paused, and Yates could see her weighing some decision in her mind. "Mr. Porter, I wonder if you might help me with something. I'm attempting to repair the fence around my garden plot, but the posts are heavy and I am having difficulty setting them deep enough. I could pay you for your time." "No need for payment, madam. I would be happy to help." "Then at least let me feed you lunch when we are finished. I make a decent stew, and it is the least I can do." Yates knew he should decline, knew he should keep his distance from this woman who made him feel things he had no right to feel. But Tom's words echoed in his mind about love making a man careful, and he found himself nodding. "That would be very kind of you, Mrs. Reid." The garden plot was behind the boarding house, a small rectangle of earth that Rebecca had clearly been tending with care. Young plants were pushing up through the soil in neat rows, and someone had started to put in a fence but had done a poor job of it. 2 of the posts were leaning at dangerous angles, and a third had fallen over completely. "My husband started this before he got sick," Rebecca explained. "I have been trying to finish it, but I am afraid I do not have the strength to set the posts properly." Yates examined the work with a critical eye. "The holes need to be deeper, and you will want to pack rocks and dirt around the base to keep them stable. Do you have a shovel and a mallet?" "In the shed there." They worked through the morning, and Yates found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around other people. Rebecca asked him questions about the ranch and his work, about where he came from and how he ended up in La Junta. He told her about Missouri and his family, about his father who had been a blacksmith and taught him that strength was a tool to be respected, not feared. He told her about Samuel and the broken arm and how it had haunted him for years. "But it was an accident," Rebecca said, holding a post steady while Yates tamped dirt around its base. "Surely your brother understood that." "He did. He does. But I think it is harder for me to forgive myself than it was for him to forgive me. That is often the way of things. We hold ourselves to standards we would never hold others to." She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt. "Do you want to know what I think, Mr. Porter?" "What is that, Mrs. Reid?" "I think you are so busy being afraid of what your hands might do that you have forgotten all the good they can do. Look at this fence. Without you, my garden would have been overrun by rabbits and deer. The plants I have been tending would have been destroyed. Your hands did this good thing, and I suspect they have done many more good things that you do not give yourself credit for." Yates looked down at his hands, dirt-stained and calloused, and tried to see them the way Rebecca did. "Maybe you are right." "I am always right," she said with a smile. "My mother told me it was my most annoying quality." They finished the fence by early afternoon, and Rebecca kept her promise about lunch. The stew was indeed decent, rich with beef and vegetables, and they ate at a small table in her room at the boarding house. It was a modest space, just a bed and a table and a few personal belongings, but Rebecca had made it homelike with curtains at the window and a quilt on the bed. "How long were you married, if you do not mind me asking?" Yates said, wiping his bowl with a piece of bread. 3 years. "Michael was a good man, steady and kind. We met in Denver and married within 6 months. He wanted to homestead out here, thought we could make a life for ourselves." Her expression grew distant. "The pneumonia came on so fast. One day he was fine, and 3 days later he was gone. I keep thinking if I had done something different, called the doctor sooner, made him stay in bed, maybe he would still be here." "You cannot think like that, Mrs. Reid. Sickness takes who it wants when it wants. My mother died of scarlet fever when I was 10, and for years I thought if I had just been a better son, maybe God would have spared her. But that is not how the world works. I know you are right, but knowing and feeling are 2 different things. They are indeed." They fell into a comfortable silence, and Yates realized with some surprise that he felt at ease in this tiny room with this tiny woman. He was not afraid of moving wrong or speaking wrong. He was just himself, and that was enough. "Mr. Porter," Rebecca said finally, "would you mind if I asked you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Why are you so afraid of your hands?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Yates found himself answering honestly. "Because they have only ever brought pain. I broke my brother's arm. I have knocked out 3 men's teeth in fights I did not start but could not avoid. I cannot hold anything delicate without fearing I will crush it. I cannot touch anything soft without worrying I will damage it. These hands are tools of destruction, Mrs. Reid, no matter how much I wish they were not." Rebecca reached across the table and took one of his hands in both of hers. Her fingers could not even wrap around his palm, and Yates froze, terrified that he would hurt her, that he would close his hand without meaning to and break every delicate bone. "You feel that?" she asked. "Feel what?" "You are not hurting me. Your hand is just resting in mine, and I am perfectly safe." She squeezed his fingers gently. "I am the one holding you, Mr. Porter. I am the one who made the choice to touch you, and I am not afraid." Yates looked down at their joined hands, at the sight of her pale fingers against his sun-darkened skin, and felt something crack open inside his chest. "You should be afraid." "Why? Because you are big, because you have been in fights. I have seen you move, Mr. Porter. I watched you work on that fence for hours, handling wood and tools with precision and care. I saw you catch that flour sack without crushing it. You are the most careful man I have ever met, and you do not even realize it. I hurt people, Mrs. Reid. You hurt people who were trying to hurt others first. There is a difference. She released his hand, and Yates felt the loss of her touch like a physical ache. I think you are a good man, Yates Porter. I think you are a man who has been given a gift of strength and who uses it wisely. And I think you should stop punishing yourself for accidents that happened years ago. Yates wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons she was wrong, but the words would not come. Instead, he said, "May I come back and check on your fence? Make sure it holds up after a few days." "I would like that very much." He came back 3 days later, and the fence was holding perfectly. But Rebecca asked him to help move some furniture in her room, so he stayed. The day after that, he ran into her at the general store again, and he carried her purchases to the boarding house. Within 2 weeks, Yates was finding excuses to go into La Junta almost every day, and Tom was giving him knowing looks but saying nothing. "You are courting her," Tom said finally, one evening after dinner. "You might not be calling it that, but that is what you are doing. She is a widow. It has only been a few months since her husband passed. It would be disrespectful. How long do you think she should mourn? A year? 2, 5? And what if by the time you decide she has mourned enough, she has moved on or moved away?" Tom poured himself a glass of whiskey and offered one to Yates, who declined. "Life is too short to wait for the perfect moment, son. If you care about her, you should tell her." "I do care about her. That is the problem. I care about her too much to risk hurting her." "And what if you never hurt her? What if you spend your whole life being careful and gentle, and you grow old together and die happy? Are you really going to deny yourself that chance because of something that might happen?" I broke Samuel's arm. "Good God, boy, are we still talking about that?" "You were 16. Tom set his glass down hard enough to make the table rattle. "You want to know what I think? I think you are using that broken arm as an excuse to keep everyone at a distance. I think you are more afraid of being loved than you are of hurting someone." The words hit Yates like a physical blow, and he stood up from the table. "I need to think." "You need to stop thinking and start feeling," Tom called after him, but Yates was already out the door. He saddled his horse and rode into the night, not sure where he was going until he found himself outside the boarding house in La Junta. There was a lamp burning in Rebecca's window, and he stood in the street for a long moment, arguing with himself. Tom was right. He was afraid of being loved because being loved meant being vulnerable, meant giving someone the power to hurt him as badly as he feared hurting others. But Rebecca had held his hand and told him she was not afraid. She had looked at him with those green eyes and seen something worth knowing. And Yates realized that he was more afraid of losing her than he was of anything his hands might do. He went to the boarding house door and knocked quietly. It was late, probably too late to be calling on a lady, but he could not wait another day. Rebecca answered wearing a nightgown and a wrapper, her hair in a long braid over one shoulder. "Mr. Porter, is something wrong?" "I need to tell you something," Yates said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I need to tell you, and I cannot wait, and I am sorry for coming so late, but I have been a coward, and I cannot be a coward anymore." Rebecca stepped aside. "Come in." They stood in her small room, and Yates felt enormous and clumsy, like a bull in a china shop. But Rebecca was looking at him with those patient green eyes, waiting, and he forced himself to speak. "I care about you, Mrs. Reid. Rebecca, I care about you more than I have cared about anyone in a very long time, and it terrifies me because I am so afraid of hurting you. Not just with my hands, but with my presence, with my size, with everything I am. I'm afraid that one day you will look at me and see a monster, and I do not think I could bear that." "Yates," she said softly, and it was the first time she had used his given name. "Come here." He took 2 steps forward, and she reached up to take both of his hands in hers. Do you trust me? Yes. Then trust me when I say I am not fragile. I am not going to break. I am a widow who has been running her own life for 3 months and managing just fine. I am a woman who crossed half the country to homestead in Colorado. I am stronger than you think. I know you are strong. That is not what I am afraid of. Then what are you afraid of? I am afraid of being happy, Yates admitted. I am afraid that if I let myself love you, something will go wrong, and it will be my fault because that is how it always is. Everything I touch, I break. You have not broken me yet, Rebecca said, and you have touched me plenty of times. Helping me with packages, fixing my fence, moving my furniture. You have been nothing but gentle. Because I am careful, because I am always careful. Good, be careful with me then, be gentle with me. But do not push me away because you are afraid of something that has not happened and might never happen. She squeezed his hands. I care about you too, Yates Porter. I did not expect to care about anyone after Michael died. I thought I would mourn for a year, and then figure out what to do with the rest of my life. But then this giant of a man helped me with a flour sack, and he was so worried about hurting me that he could barely move, and I thought, there is someone who understands what it is like to be afraid. What are you afraid of? Yates asked. I am afraid of being alone. I am afraid of being weak. I am afraid that I made a mistake coming out here and that I should go back to Denver where my parents are, where life is easier. But then I think about giving up this garden I planted, giving up this life I am trying to build, giving up the chance to know you better, and I realize I am more afraid of running away than I am of staying. She pulled on his hands, trying to draw him closer, and Yates let himself be pulled until he was kneeling in front of her, bringing their faces almost level. So do not run away from me, Yates. Do not run away because you are afraid. Be brave enough to stay and see what happens. I do not know how to do this, Yates said. I have never courted anyone. I have never let myself get close enough to try. Then we will figure it out together. Rebecca released one of his hands to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I am not asking you to be perfect. I am just asking you to try. Yates closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, these small fingers that could never hurt him, this tiny woman who was braver than he could ever hope to be. I will try, he promised. God help me, I will try. They stayed like that for a long moment, and then Rebecca leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft and sweet and over too quickly, but it was enough to seal the promise they had just made to each other. I should go, Yates said, pulling back reluctantly. It is late and people will talk if they see me here. Let them talk, but yes, you should probably go. Rebecca walked him to the door. Will you come to dinner tomorrow? I will make something better than stew. I would like that very much. Yates rode back to the ranch with his heart lighter than it had been in years. Tom was still awake, sitting on the porch with his whiskey, and he raised his glass when Yates dismounted. I am guessing things went well. They did. Yates tied his horse and joined Tom on the porch. You were right. About all of it. I am old, son. I have been right about a lot of things. Tom took a sip of his whiskey. So what happens now? Now I court her properly. I take her to dinner, I spend time with her, I let her get to know me, and I try not to be so afraid all the time. That is a good plan. Your hands doing all right. Yates looked down at his hands, still able to feel the ghost of Rebecca's touch on his skin. They are better than they have been in a long time. The courtship was slow and careful, two people learning each other's rhythms and fears. Yates came to La Junta 3 or 4 times a week, and they would walk together through the town or sit in her garden while she tended her plants. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his mother who had loved music and his father who had been strict but fair. She told him about growing up in Denver, about her younger sister who had married a banker and thought Rebecca was crazy for homesteading. You miss your family, Yates asked one afternoon. They were sitting on a blanket in her garden, watching clouds roll across the sky. Sometimes. But I do not miss the person I was when I lived with them. I was always the adventurous one, the one who wanted more than what was expected. They wanted me to marry well and have children and be content with parlor life. But I wanted to see what I was capable of, what I could build with my own two hands. And what have you learned? That I am capable of more than I thought, that I am stronger than I look, that loss does not break you unless you let it. She turned her head to look at him. That sometimes the most unexpected things turn out to be the most important. Like a big cowboy with a fear of his own hands. Exactly like that. Yates reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so she could pull away if she wanted, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were careful, so careful, and Rebecca leaned into his touch with a soft smile. "You do not have to be so cautious all the time," she said. "I am not going to shatter. I know, but being cautious is how I show I care. Then show me in other ways too. Hold my hand without worrying. Put your arm around me. Let yourself touch me like you want to, not like you are afraid to." It was easier said than done, but Yates tried. He held her hand when they walked, his large fingers carefully intertwined with her small ones. He put his arm around her shoulders when they sat together, marveling at how she fit perfectly against his side. And slowly, carefully, he let himself believe that he could be close to someone without destroying them. 2 months into their courtship, Rebecca invited him to dinner at the boarding house again, and this time she had something to tell him. "I have been thinking about the future," she said as they ate, "about what I want and where I am going. And I realized that I do not want to keep living in this boarding house, paying rent to a man who barely tolerates me. I want to build something permanent." "What do you have in mind?" "Michael and I had claimed a homestead plot about 3 miles from here, out toward the Triple Crown. We never got around to building on it before he got sick, but I still have the claim and I have been saving money. I think I want to build a house there, start fresh." Yates set down his fork. "That is a lot of work for one person." "I know, but I was hoping I would not have to do it alone." Rebecca looked at him steadily. "I was hoping you might help me, and I was hoping that when the house is built you might consider living in it with me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "Rebecca, are you asking me to marry you?" "I suppose I am." "I know it is unconventional for the woman to ask, and I know we have only been courting for 2 months, but life is short, Yates. Michael taught me that, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not know what I want." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I want you. I want a life with you. I want to build something together and see where it leads. But if you are not ready, if you need more time, I understand." Yates thought about Tom's words, about life being too short to wait for the perfect moment. He thought about how Rebecca made him feel, like he was more than the sum of his size and strength. He thought about waking up next to her every morning, about building a home together, about having someone who understood his fears and loved him anyway. "I do not need more time," he said. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you, Rebecca Reid." Her smile was brilliant, transforming her entire face, and she came around the table to kiss him. Yates pulled her into his lap, these strong arms that had been weapons his entire life now a place of safety and warmth, and he kissed her back with all the feeling he had been holding inside. "We should do this properly," Rebecca said when they finally broke apart. "I know I asked, but you should still speak to the minister, arrange a date, and I should write to my parents. They will want to come, I think. And I should tell Tom, though I suspect he already knows. Everyone probably already knows. We are not exactly subtle." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in La Junta, with Tom standing as Yates's best man and Rebecca's sister making the trip from Denver to stand with her. Rebecca's parents came as well, and Yates could see the worry in their eyes when they first saw him, this giant of a man their daughter had chosen. But by the end of the wedding breakfast, Rebecca's mother had pulled him aside. "My daughter tells me you are afraid of hurting her," she said quietly. "And I can see why you would worry, given the size difference. But I want you to know something, Mr. Porter. Rebecca has always known her own mind. She has always chosen her own path. If she has chosen you, it is because she sees something in you that is worth having. So do not waste time doubting yourself. Just love her well and the rest will follow." "I will, madam. I promise you, I will love her as best I can." That is all any of us can do. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, and Yates was so nervous he could barely breathe. Rebecca seemed to sense his fear because she took his hands and held them, looking up at him with those steady green eyes. "I am not afraid," she said. "You should not be either." "I have never done this before," Yates admitted. "I have never been with anyone. I am afraid I will hurt you, afraid I will do something wrong. Then we will learn together. And if you do hurt me, I will tell you and we will figure it out. But Yates, you have to trust that I know what I am getting into. I have been married before. I know what happens on a wedding night. And I am choosing you, with full knowledge of who and what you are." So Yates tried to trust. He was careful and slow and so gentle that Rebecca had to encourage him to be less cautious, to let himself feel without constantly monitoring every movement. It was awkward and sweet and more wonderful than Yates had ever imagined, and when it was over, he held her against his chest and marveled that this small, fierce woman was his wife. "See," Rebecca murmured sleepily. "I told you that you would not break me. You are the bravest person I have ever met. No, I just know a good man when I see one." They started building the house the next week. Tom gave Yates time off from the ranch, and several other men from town volunteered to help, drawn by Rebecca's cooking and her determined spirit. The homestead plot was a good piece of land with a creek running through it and decent grazing. They built a simple house, 2 rooms and a loft, with a stone fireplace and glass windows that Rebecca insisted on. "I want to be able to see the sunrise," she explained. "I want light." It took 3 months to build, working from dawn to dusk every day that weather permitted. Yates did most of the heavy lifting, moving timbers and stones that would have taken 2 or 3 regular men to shift. Rebecca worked alongside him, sawing boards and driving nails, refusing to be sidelined just because she was small. "We are partners," she said when Yates suggested she might want to rest. "Partners work together." The day they moved into the finished house, Yates carried Rebecca over the threshold, these huge arms cradling her tiny frame, and she laughed with pure joy. They had no furniture yet beyond a bed and a table, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and their own sweat. "What do you think?" Rebecca asked, turning in a slow circle to take in the space. "Does it feel like home?" "It feels like home because you are here," Yates said. "You could make anywhere feel like home. That winter was hard, with snow piling up and temperatures dropping below 0. But the house held strong, and they kept each other warm through the long nights. Yates worked at the Triple Crown when weather permitted, and Rebecca tended to her garden and started planning for spring. They fell into a rhythm of domestic life, learning each other's habits and preferences, arguing occasionally about small things and laughing about it later. "I never thought I could have this," Yates said one night as they lay in bed, Rebecca curled against his side like she belonged there. "I never let myself imagine being happy." "Are you happy?" "More than I ever thought possible." "Good, because I am happy too, and I intend to stay that way for a very long time." Spring came with a rush of green, and Rebecca's garden flourished. She sold vegetables in town and used the money to buy chickens and a milk cow. Yates built a barn with help from Tom, and they acquired 2 horses. The homestead was becoming a real working farm, modest but productive. In June, Rebecca told him she was pregnant. Yates felt fear rise up in him like a flood, immediate and overwhelming. What if I hurt the baby? What if I am holding it and I forget how strong I am and I hurt it? You will not, Rebecca said calmly. She was knitting tiny socks, her fingers flying across the needles. You will be careful, just like you are with everything else, and I will be there to help you. We will figure it out together. What if I am a terrible father? You will not be. You are patient and kind and good. Those are the qualities that make a good father, not the size of your hands. But the fear gnawed at Yates through the months of Rebecca's pregnancy. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood until it was smooth as glass so there would be no splinters. He prepared a room for the baby in their small house. He did everything he could think of to be ready, but the fear remained. Rebecca grew larger through the summer and fall, and Yates marveled at how her small body could accommodate the growing child. He was gentle with her, even more careful than usual, until she finally snapped at him one evening. I am pregnant, not made of glass. You can touch me without worrying I will shatter. I am just trying to be careful. I know, and I love you for it, but you are driving me mad. I am perfectly capable of getting up from a chair without assistance, and I can certainly carry a basket of vegetables in from the garden. She stood and stretched, one hand pressed to her lower back. This baby is going to come whether you worry or not, so you might as well try to relax and enjoy the rest of my pregnancy. I am trying. Try harder. The baby came on a cold February night in 1879, arriving fast and furious after only a few hours of labor. Yates paced outside while the midwife worked with Rebecca, and when he finally heard the baby cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. You can come in now, the midwife called, and Yates entered to find Rebecca propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. It is a boy, she said. A healthy, loud boy. Yates approached slowly, afraid to even breathe on this new life they had created. The baby was so small, so impossibly small, with a red face and tiny fists waving in the air. You want to hold him? Rebecca asked. I do not know how. Sit down and I will show you. Yates sat in the chair beside the bed and Rebecca carefully placed the baby in his arms. Support his head, that is it. You are doing fine. The baby weighed almost nothing, a handful of warmth and possibility. Yates looked down at this tiny person, at the delicate features and impossibly small fingers, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. What should we name him? Rebecca asked. I was thinking we could name him after your husband, Yates said. Michael. It seems right, since he brought you to Colorado, and without him we never would have met. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. That is very generous of you. It is the truth. I am not threatened by his memory, Rebecca. He was a good man who loved you, and he helped make you who you are. Our son should carry his name. Michael Porter, Rebecca said, testing the name. I like it. Michael Porter was a healthy baby who grew quickly under Rebecca's attentive care. And Yates, despite all his fears, proved to be a natural father. He was patient with the baby's crying, gentle when changing nappies, careful but not afraid. He would sit for hours with Michael on his chest, these massive hands supporting the tiny body, and sing songs his mother had taught him. You see, Rebecca said, watching them one evening. I told you that you would not hurt him. I am still terrified every time I pick him up. Good. That fear makes you careful, but do not let it make you miss the joy of being his father. As Michael grew from baby to toddler, Yates's fear gradually lessened. The boy was sturdy and adventurous, already showing signs of his father's size, and he had no fear of Yates whatsoever. He would climb on his father like Yates was a mountain, shrieking with laughter when Yates lifted him over his head. "He loves you so much," Rebecca said, watching Michael demand to be thrown in the air for the 10th time. "He does not see your size as something frightening. To him, you are just Papa, the person who makes him feel safe. I hope he never has reason to fear me. He will not. Because you are exactly the father he needs." They had 2 more children over the next few years, a daughter named Ruth in 1881 and another son named Thomas in 1883. The house expanded along with their family, Yates adding rooms as they were needed. The homestead prospered, and they acquired more land and more livestock. It was not an easy life, but it was a good one, built on hard work and love and the daily choice to be patient with each other. Yates still worked occasionally at the Triple Crown, and Tom became a beloved figure in their children's lives, a grandfather in all but name. He would tell them stories about their father's early days on the ranch, carefully editing out the parts about fights and fear. "Your papa is the best man I know," Tom told Michael one day when the boy was 7. "He is strong, yes, but he is also kind, and that kindness makes him stronger than any amount of muscle ever could." "Papa says he used to be afraid of his hands," Michael said, "but I do not understand why. His hands are good. They fix things and build things and toss me in the air. Your papa had to learn that for himself, but he had help from your mama, who was brave enough to see past the size to the man underneath. Mama is small, but she is not scared of anything. That is very true. Your mother is one of the bravest people I have ever met." Rebecca and Yates grew older together, their lives intertwined in ways that made it hard to remember what life had been like before they met. They had disagreements, of course, about money and discipline and the 100 small decisions that make up a life. But they never went to bed angry, and they never stopped choosing each other, day after day, year after year. When Michael was 15, he asked his father about the fear that had defined so much of Yates's early life. "Grandma says you were afraid to court Mama because you thought you would hurt her. Is that true?" They were mending fence together, father and son working in comfortable silence until the question broke the peace. Yates considered his answer carefully. "It is true. I was so afraid of my strength and my size that I almost let your mother slip away. I thought I was protecting her by keeping my distance, but really, I was just protecting myself from the possibility of pain. What changed your mind? Your mother did. She refused to let me hide behind my fear. She saw who I really was and demanded that I see it too. And she had the courage to take my hands even when I was afraid to offer them." Yates paused, looking out across the land they had built together. "Fear is not a bad thing, Michael. Fear keeps you careful, keeps you from being reckless, but fear should not keep you from living. That is the lesson your mother taught me, and it is the most important lesson I can pass on to you." "I am glad you were not too afraid," Michael said. "Otherwise I would not be here." "I am glad too, son, gladder than I can say." Ruth and Thomas grew up strong and healthy, Ruth inheriting her mother's fierce determination, and Thomas showing signs of his father's great size. The homestead continued to prosper, and Yates and Rebecca became respected figures in La Junta, known for their kindness and their willingness to help neighbors in need. When Yates was 45, Tom passed away peacefully in his sleep. They buried him on the Triple Crown, and Yates spoke at the funeral about the man who had given him a chance when no one else would, who had taught him that strength could be a gift if used wisely. "Tom believed in me when I did not believe in myself," Yates said, looking out at the gathered mourners. "He saw past my fear to the man I could become, and he gave me the wisdom I needed to build a life worth living. I owe him everything, and I will spend the rest of my days trying to pass on what he taught me." Rebecca stood beside him, her hand in his, and Yates drew strength from her presence the way he had for nearly 20 years. They walked back to their wagon together, these two people who had built a life out of courage and carefully offered hands. "Tom would be proud of you," Rebecca said as they drove home. "Proud of the man you have become, proud of the family we have built." "I hope so." He deserved to see his wisdom bear fruit. He did see it. Every time he visited, every time he played with the children, every time he looked at us together, he saw it. He knew what he helped create. The years continued to pass, bringing joy and sorrow in equal measure. Michael grew up and married a school teacher from Denver, bringing her back to La Junta to start their own homestead. Ruth showed no interest in marriage, instead becoming a successful businesswoman who ran the general store. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps, working with his hands and helping neighbors with tasks too heavy for one person alone. Yates and Rebecca grew old together, their hands weathered and worn but still reaching for each other across the dinner table, across the bed, across all the days of their shared life. Yates's hair went gray, and Rebecca's copper locks faded to silver, but they were still the same people who had found each other outside a general store in 1878, still the same people who had chosen to be brave. "You remember when you were afraid to hold my hand?" Rebecca asked one evening. They were sitting on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. They were both in their 60s now, grandparents multiple times over, their bodies slowing but their minds still sharp. "I remember everything about those early days. I remember seeing you struggle with that flour sack and being afraid to help. I remember wrapping my bleeding knuckles and thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met. I remember kneeling in your room at the boarding house and promising to try. You did more than try. You succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder and Yates wrapped his arm around her, these movements so natural now that he did not even think about them. "We built a good life, Yates Porter. We did. We really did. No regrets, not a single one. Well, maybe I regret wasting those first few weeks being afraid instead of courting you properly. But you made up for it. 50 years of being courted is more than most women get." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Yates thought about all the things his hands had built over the years. They had built a house and a barn. They had built fences and cradles. They had held his children when they were born and taught them how to work and play. They had held Rebecca through illness and health, through joy and sorrow, through all the days of their life together. These hands that he had feared for so long, that he had seen as weapons and curses, had turned out to be the greatest gift he could have asked for. Not because they were strong, though strength had its uses, but because Rebecca had taught him how to use them gently. She had shown him that power without gentleness was just violence, but power combined with care was something else entirely. It was protection. It was building. It was love made tangible. "What are you thinking about?" Rebecca asked. "I am thinking about my hands," Yates said, holding up one weathered palm. "About how afraid I used to be of them, about how you taught me to see them differently. I did not teach you anything you did not already know. I just helped you see what was already there." Rebecca took his hand in both of hers, just like she had that day in the boarding house so many years ago. "You were always gentle, Yates. You were always careful. You just needed someone to believe in you, and you were that someone." "I was. And I am glad I was brave enough to take your hands when you were too afraid to offer them." They had great-grandchildren now, small people who would climb on Yates just like his own children had, fearless and laughing. He was slower than he used to be, and his strength had faded with age, but he could still lift a child onto his shoulders, still build a toy box or repair a broken chair. His hands were still useful, still good for something beyond destruction. Michael brought his own son by one afternoon, a boy of 6 named Samuel in honor of Yates's brother. The child was small for his age, and Michael was worried. "He gets pushed around by the bigger boys," Michael explained while Samuel played in the yard. "I do not know how to help him." "How did you handle being so much bigger than everyone else?" "I learned to use my size to protect people instead of hurt them, but Samuel's challenge is different. Being small in a world of bigger people takes its own kind of courage." Yates watched his grandson for a moment. "Bring him here. I want to tell him something." Michael called Samuel over, and the boy came running, already comfortable around his grandfather despite the size difference. Yates knelt down with difficulty, his old knees protesting, and looked Samuel in the eye. "Your father tells me you are having trouble with bigger boys. They say I am too small to play with them," Samuel said, his lower lip trembling. "They say I will just get hurt." "Let me tell you a secret," Yates said. "The biggest person in the room is not always the strongest. My wife, your great-grandmother, she is half my size, but she is 10 times braver than I ever was. She built a life out here when plenty of bigger, stronger men gave up and went home. Size does not matter half as much as heart does. But they are bigger than me. Then you be smarter than them. Be kinder than them. Be braver than them, and find people who value those qualities more than size." Yates put his large hand on the boy's small shoulder. "I spent my whole life being afraid of how big I was, afraid I would hurt people. But your great-grandmother taught me that what matters is not your size but what you do with it. You are small, Samuel, but you can use that. You can be quick and clever and kind, and you will find that those things matter more in the long run than being able to lift heavy objects." "Really? Really, I promise you." Samuel hugged him, these small arms barely making it halfway around Yates's chest, and Yates carefully hugged him back, mindful of his strength even at his age. When Michael and Samuel left, Rebecca came out onto the porch. "That was good advice you gave him." "I hope so. I wish someone had told me when I was young that size is just one piece of who you are, not the whole story. You had to learn it for yourself, and now you get to pass that wisdom on. That is the gift of growing old." They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with all 3 of their children, their spouses, their grandchildren, and several great-grandchildren in attendance. The house was full of noise and laughter, and at one point, Yates stood in the doorway and simply looked at what they had created. All these people, all these lives, all because Rebecca had been brave enough to take his hands when he was too afraid to offer them. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca asked, coming to stand beside him. She had to look up even further now that age had bent his spine, but her eyes were still the same bright green, still seeing past his size to the man underneath. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how blessed, how grateful. Me too." They danced that night, slowly because their bodies were not what they used to be, but with the same care and gentleness that had characterized their whole marriage. Yates held Rebecca as though she were made of something precious, and she rested her head on his chest and smiled. "Still afraid you are going to hurt me," she teased. "Every single day, but I have learned to live with the fear and love you anyway. That is all I ever asked for." When Yates was 72, he fell ill with pneumonia, the same illness that had taken Rebecca's first husband. Rebecca nursed him through it with the fierce determination that had defined her entire life, refusing to let him give up, refusing to let him slip away. "You fought for me for 50 years, she told him when his fever was at its worst. "Now I am fighting for you. And I am not giving up, Yates Porter, so you better not give up either." He recovered, slowly and incompletely, but he recovered. His strength was greatly diminished and he tired easily, but he was still there, still present, still able to hold Rebecca's hand and watch the sunset from their porch. "I thought I was going to lose you," Rebecca said when he was finally well enough to sit outside. "Not yet. I am not done with you yet." "Good, because I am not done with you either." They had 5 more years together, years of quiet peace and deep contentment. Their children visited regularly, and their grandchildren brought their own children to meet the old couple who had built the homestead and the family. Yates told stories about the early days, about being so afraid of his hands that he almost let happiness pass him by, and the young people listened with interest. "Hard to imagine you being afraid of anything, great-grandpa," one of the teenagers said. "You are the biggest person I have ever seen." Size does not protect you from fear, child. If anything, it makes fear worse because you know what damage you can do if you are not careful. But fear does not have to control you. You can acknowledge it and move forward anyway. That is what courage really is. Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep when he was 77, with Rebecca lying beside him. She woke to find him gone, these massive hands finally still, and she held them one last time, remembering the day she had first taken them in hers and refused to let go. They buried him on the homestead, on a hill overlooking the house they had built together. The whole town came to pay their respects, and person after person told stories about how Yates had helped them, how his strength and gentleness had made their lives better. "He was the best of men," Tom's nephew said, speaking for the Triple Crown. "Strong but never cruel, powerful but never dangerous. He used what he was given to build and protect, never to destroy. We should all aspire to be half the man he was." Rebecca stood at the grave, supported by her children, and looked at the mound of earth that covered her husband. "You were never as frightening as you thought you were," she said softly. "You were always just Yates, always just the man I loved. I hope you finally believe that now." She lived another 8 years without him, surrounded by family, still fierce and determined even in her 80s. She tended her garden until the year before she died, and she kept the house exactly as it had been when Yates was alive, his chair by the fireplace waiting as though he might come back at any moment. When Rebecca finally passed, they buried her beside Yates on the hill, and the entire family gathered to say goodbye. Michael, now an old man himself, spoke at her funeral. "My mother was the smallest person in any room, but she was also the bravest. She saw a man who was afraid of his own strength, and she taught him how to be gentle. She built a homestead and a family out of nothing but determination and love. And she showed all of us that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. She took my father's hands when he was too afraid to offer them, and in doing so, she built a legacy that will last for generations." The homestead stayed in the family, passing from Michael to his children and then to their children. The house was maintained and expanded, becoming a place where the family gathered for holidays and celebrations. And the story of Yates and Rebecca became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. "He was afraid his big hands would hurt her," the story always began. But she took them anyway. And in taking them, Rebecca had given Yates the greatest gift anyone had ever given him. She had given him permission to be human, to be fallible, to be afraid and still be loved. She had shown him that strength could be gentle and power could be tender. She had taken his hands, those massive, careful hands that he had feared his entire life, and she had shown him all the good they could do. Their great-great-grandchildren played in the yard where Yates had once built a barn, where Rebecca had once tended her garden. They climbed trees and chased chickens, and never knew that the land they played on had been built by a man who was afraid, and a woman who refused to let him be afraid alone. But the family remembered. They told the stories and kept the legacy alive, and on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Colorado landscape, you could almost see them there on the porch, Two people who had chosen courage over fear, who had built a life out of carefully offered hands and brave acceptance. Yates had been afraid his big hands would hurt her. Rebecca had taken them anyway. And in that simple act of faith, they had created something that would last far beyond their lifetimes, a love story that proved gentleness was not weakness and strength was not violence. They had shown that the biggest hearts often beat in the biggest chests, and that the bravest souls sometimes come in the smallest packages. The homestead stood for over 100 years, a testament to what two people could build when they refused to let fear win. And though Yates and Rebecca were long gone, their story remained, passed down through the generations as a reminder that love requires courage, that gentleness is a choice, and that sometimes the greatest act of bravery is simply taking someone's hand and refusing to let go. The sun set over the Colorado plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, just as it had for all those years when Yates and Rebecca sat together on their porch. The house was full of family, the land was productive and well tended, and somewhere in the earth of that hillside, two people rested side by side, their hands finally still but their love still echoing through the lives of everyone they had touched. Yates Porter had been afraid of his hands, afraid of his strength, afraid of the damage he might cause. But Rebecca Reid had looked at those hands and seen only the good they could do, the gentleness they could offer, the love they could express. She had been brave when he could not be, strong when he felt weak and certain when he doubted. And in the end, that was what their story was really about. Not about size or strength or fear, but about two people who chose each other despite all the reasons they could have chosen differently. It was about a man learning to see himself through someone else's eyes, and a woman brave enough to show him what she saw. It was about hands that could have hurt but chose to hold instead, about power that could have destroyed but chose to protect. It was a love story, pure and simple. And it was proof that sometimes the most unlikely pairings create the most enduring legacies, that fear can be overcome with patience and faith, and that the measure of a man is not in his size, but in how he chooses to use the strength he has been given. The story ended where it began, with hands carefully offered and bravely taken, with two people who had built a life that would outlast them both. And if you listened carefully on those quiet Colorado evenings, you could almost hear their voices on the wind, still telling each other the same truths they had learned together so many years ago. Be gentle. Be brave. Take the hands that are offered, even when fear says to hold back. Build something that will last. Love with everything you have. And never, ever let fear keep you from the life you are meant to live. That was the legacy of Yates and Rebecca Porter, the gentle giant and the tiny bride who took his hands anyway. And it was a legacy that would never be forgotten.